Sometimes, life brings together people in unexpected ways, and these connections can have a profound impact on our lives. The story I'm about to share is about two individuals who met in an unusual setting at an unconventional time and how their lives were transformed in remarkable ways. It's a story of love, second chances, family, and the significance of having faithful companions on the path to happiness. Immerse yourself in this captivating narrative of life's twists and turns, which gives us hope for a brighter future even when it seems like all is lost. I walked into the lounge to get a drink. It was only 2 in the afternoon, but I had just left my lawyer's office. I wanted a divorce. There weren't many people in the lounge between lunch and dinner. Joe, the bartender, asked if I was having a bad day. I replied that I'd just applied for a divorce from Linda. Joe said he was sorry to hear that and asked how long I'd been with Linda. I told him it'd be 20 years next month, and the divorce should be finalized in November. She doesn't fight it, which I'm pretty sure she won't. I looked around and saw a nice-looking woman sitting in a booth by herself. I asked Joe if he knew her and he told me her name was Beth and her divorce was final today. I decided to talk to her. "Hi, my name is Jay. Do you mind if I join you? I don't think I would be the best company, but I'd like to try. Besides, I'm not looking for anything serious," she replied. "I understand Joe told you your divorce was final today and I filed for mine today. It would just be nice to have someone to talk to." She looked up at me and stared for a few seconds. "Go ahead and sit down, Jay. My name is Beth and I am now single again after 6 years of marriage. I'll have been married for 20 years next month. Would you like to swap stories?" I asked Beth, smiling at her. I told her I hadn't eaten today and asked if she wanted lunch. We were both drinking by then, so it seemed like a good idea. I called Joe over and we each ordered a Reuben sandwich. I asked Joe to bring us each another drink as well. The food was the same, and it was a good start. She was a nice-looking woman, probably in her early 30s. I'd say she was the girl next door type. If I were a kid, you never pay a lot of attention to her until you look deeper. She thanked me for sitting with her and said she seemed quite depressed, but having someone to talk to helped. As we ate lunch, she began to tell me a little about herself. She said she was born and raised here, went to college to become a teacher, and always loved kids. She'd been teaching at the elementary school for 8 years. She dated a little, but nothing serious happened until she met Ree. He's her ex. My husband was a salesman who sold sound equipment to schools. When I first saw him, we kind of connected. We talked for a while, and the next time he came to the school, he asked me out. The rest is pretty much the normal dating scene. 6 months later, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Our life was rather normal. I worked at the school, and he did his sales. He would sometimes be gone for a couple of days on trips, but that was expected. Nothing in our lives that would stand out. We went out on the odd occasion, saw movies and danced, although I was never the best dancer. He wanted kids and we tried after a couple of years. I went to a specialist and she told me I could have kids, but it would be harder due to my physical conditions. The doctor said my tests came back and it would just be harder for me to conceive. I even took some drugs to help, but there were no results. Ray started to become I was getting pretty tired of him, but there wasn't much I could do. We seemed to be growing farther and farther apart. I suggested we could adopt, but he said he didn't want someone else's kid, he wanted his own. I didn't have that problem. I was with kids every day and I loved them all. I didn't really miss not having any when I got home. It was where I got away from kids for the evening. I still wouldn't have minded having my own, but I wanted to have them for Ray. Then last year he came home and said we had to talk. I knew there was something wrong when he told me he'd had an affair with his secretary and she was pregnant. I didn't know what to say. He said he loved me but she was having his child. The first thing that came to my mind was that he'd make a terrible father. I felt sorry for the child. He'd have a cheating father who only cared about himself. We argued and I told him he could. I told him he could have his girlfriend and her baby. I was getting a divorce and would be out of the apartment by the end of the week. I stayed with my parents that night, and my dad and I went to the apartment the next day. I took all my personal things. Everything else had to go through court. We owed about as much as we owned. He liked to show off and always spent a lot of his money and some of mine too. We split what we had left and I was able to keep I kept the vehicle and the money I had put away before we were married, so I pretty much started over. I'm renting a nice apartment and I got most of the furniture I wanted. He's in his hall. I said, what she said. Your ex is in his hall. He had a wonderful woman who works with kids, and if you don't mind me saying so, she is quite attractive. It made her blush. All he could think about was himself. I think you're much better off. We finished our lunch and Beth said I felt much better now than telling her my hard luck story. I told her maybe we could get together and I would tell her about it another time. I had 2 drinks, but I had no idea how many Beth had since she was there before I arrived. I asked her if I could take her home, seeing she might have drunk too much. Jay, you're very nice, but I don't think I'm ready. I'll call a cab and he can bring me back here to get my vehicle. I promise that's all. I just want to get you home safely. You can ask Joe the bartender. I'm an okay guy. We got up and I walked her to her car. She wasn't drunk, but why take any chances? I drove her home and walked her to her apartment door. I had already called for a taxi to come to her place and get me before I left the lounge. She thanked me for caring for her well. I asked her if I could call her and she gave me her phone number. I also asked her if she knew of any apartments for rent. I was going to be moving all my things in the following days. Her block was made up of condo units, and many of them were rented. She said she would ask around and let me know if she found anything. It was a nice neighborhood, and most of the apartments had 2 or 3 bedrooms. Beth was a 2-bedroom apartment. She told me her cab had arrived, so I handed her the keys to her car and apartment. We said our goodbyes, and I went home to what I knew would be one of those arguments. I'll explain exactly what happened. A lot of it I probably won't be telling Beth. My wife Linda and I met right after I graduated from a community college. I took a 2-year course to become a claims adjuster. I did a 1-year course to become a claims adjuster. Linda was an offender and I stopped by her work to see how bad the damage was to her car. I explained to her what the company would give her for the damage. I worked for an insurance company that repaired a lot of the small damage claims in their own designated body shops. If a customer chose to go elsewhere, we would write them a check. Linda decided to use our approved body shop for her car. I was instantly attracted to her. She worked for a small newspaper at the time, taking photos and writing ads. I asked her out and she accepted. We started going out all the time. The first time we had sex was great. It wasn't 7 months before we got married. Before we got married, Linda and I had 2 kids in the next 2 years. Her mother watched the kids while Linda and I worked. I was in charge of a 4-county area, so I might sometimes spend a night or 2 away from home. My territory was mostly farm country, so it all depended on my schedule. Neither of us seemed to have a problem with it. Linda was a good mother, and I thought I was a pretty good father. We took the kids on vacations, into the amusement park, zoo, and so on. Our love life was fairly regular, especially when I was away for a day or 2. I never cheated on her, even though I had a lot of opportunities in my line of work. She'd gotten a promotion a few years ago and done a lot more in advertising. She also reviewed lots of new and renovated businesses in town and the surrounding areas. Around 6 months ago, she seemed to change. Even the kids noticed. My daughter started at the local college and was in her first year, but lived at home. My son was a senior in high school and would be graduating. Linda had already been accepted to the same college. She seemed to argue with all of us more often. I told the kids that it was probably due to a change in life and that we would have to live with it. I thought I'd do something special for Christmas and order tickets for a holiday cruise. We would be leaving on Christmas Eve and returning on New Year's Day. Maybe it would put our marriage back on track. I was going to keep it a secret until after Thanksgiving. She often told me I wasn't as fun as I used to be. I didn't know what she expected from me. Maybe it was that we were wanting different things now. I didn't really know. My dad said, my daughter Becky. My mom's always going out when you're not home. She never used to go out that often. I asked her where she was going. She told me. I asked why she was telling me this. I didn't say I didn't believe her. I just wanted to know why she was telling me. She goes out twice a week, sometimes even 3 times. It's always when I'm not home. She does get home by midnight, but I guess it bothers me. I talked to Linda the following day and asked her about I went out with my friends and some of my clients. My kids are grown and pretty much on their own, so I get bored when you're gone and I go out once in a while. I mentioned to Becky that I talked with her mom and explained what she told me. Have you ever seen? I asked a couple of times when they got out of the car to let mom in. To be honest, I think they were overdressed. They always had their hair done and wore sexy long dresses. It would be what you would expect to see in Las Vegas. One woman was black, but mom said it was one of her clients. She said it had something to do with a new nightclub opening up. She asked how mom dresses and if she dresses the same as these other women. I told her that mom does wear some sexy clothes, and that she's even borrowed a few of my outfits, which I know are too tight on her. I wish she would just get back to being mom. Hopefully this is just another phase she's going through. Becky said it was just another phase, which made me wonder if Linda had done things like this before. The kids never mentioned it to me, so I've always trusted her. Becky was a really smart girl and had a tendency to notice changes. I asked my son Brian about it. He said the women Linda went out with were attractive, but agreed with Becky that they always seemed to dress too formally. He also didn't care to see his mother in a short dress. Linda was quite short, only 5 feet 1 inch and weighed 120 pounds. She worked hard to look good, and it paid off. She gave me a call on my mobile to tell me she was going out to dinner with one of her clients to one of the local lounges. It was about 30 minutes outside of town. She said she'd be a couple of hours late getting home. I was actually in the area at the time, looking at a car accident and an even more wrecked driver. I decided to stop in and see what was going on. I walked in the door and told the greeter that my wife was sitting there and I needed to talk with her. I walked over to the table and surprised Linda J. She asked what I was doing there and seemed a bit nervous. Across from her was a woman that she looked really sexy. The kids had told me she looked and dressed like a model, but she just stared at me. I was right down the road when I got your call. Who is your friend? I asked. Oh, I'm sorry, Jay. This is my client, Charlie. This is my husband, Jay. Charlie held out her hand in a kind of limp way. Sorry, but this is a business dinner, Charlie. I need to discuss a new nightclub that she and some of her friends are opening up in the next month or so. They're giving me the exclusive story. I shouldn't have stopped in, but I was just down the road. I'll see you in a couple of hours. Linda said, Charlie. Nice meeting you. I gave Linda a quick kiss. I knew she was annoyed, but I didn't care. I left the lounge and called the kids to tell them their mom was out with one of her clients and that I was taking them out for pizza. I spoke with them and told them I'd met their mom's friend, Charlie. They were right about her friends. She was overdressed, but she was quite striking. I told them that their mother had told me about a new club that was opening up and that I had the exclusive. I think they were at least glad that I knew what was going on. We ate our pizza and they ate their own. Then they told me about school. When Linda got home, she told me. She told me I'd embarrassed her. She said I'd humiliated her. All I did was stop in and say hi to my wife. I knew when she was like this that it didn't do any good to argue with her. She even insinuated that I'd almost made her lose her exclusive story. What was she hiding? I knew something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it. The first thing I thought was that if I found out she was sleeping with another man, I wasn't sure how I would handle it. She was the mother of my kids. For the next couple of weeks, she barely spoke to me unless she had to. She was nice to our son, though. Graduation was coming up, but I think it was just for show. Her parents and my parents were both there. We definitely had to talk about our marriage and where it might be headed. I hadn't had to stay away from home since I met Charlie. She hadn't gone out with her friends either, which made me wonder. On Wednesday, I told her I'd be gone Friday overnight, but I'd be home Saturday morning. She didn't say anything to me and left for work. I really didn't have to stay anywhere, but if what Becky said was true, Linda would be going out. The worst that would happen is that I would be wrong and spend a night in a motel. I called home around 8. It was 8 p.m. and Brian told me that his mother had left to go out with her girlfriends. A woman had just come by and picked Linda up. She told Brian she would be home late because they were going to a party in the next town. Brian told me the name of the club. I knew where it was. It wasn't the type of club where I went in and was surprised at how full the place was. I got myself a drink and went up to the second floor, which was more like a balcony but had a few tables. I met a woman who probably worked at the bar. I figured she'd be a good cover since. I thought I'd stick to the sidelines for now. I bought her a drink and got chatting. I was trying to pay attention to her, but at the same time I wanted to find Linda. I finally located her on the lower level at a table with Lisa, a divorced friend of hers that she said she didn't hang around with. If she and Lisa were friends again, I knew it was trouble. Lisa was accused in her divorce of running a WH house out of a bar she managed. Linda told me she never knew anything about it. At the time, I had no reason to doubt her. After Lisa got divorced, I heard she left town, but now I remember it. I was told by Linda that they were with 2 other women who seemed to be dressed rather more formally than was strictly necessary. One was Charlie, but I didn't know who the other one was. She seemed to be Asian. Charlie was holding Linda's hand, but her other hand was on Linda's thigh. I sat there for a while to see how much friendlier they would get. Charlie seemed tall, but she was wearing really high heels next to Linda. Most women look tall, but the Asian woman seemed a bit shorter. Both looked glamorous, but out of place. The girl I was with was happy that I kept buying her drinks. That was her job, to get me to buy her as many drinks as possible. She was playing with her for money, of course. Well, what else was she playing for? There's MasterCard, right? She called herself Bambi and asked me if I wanted to get a room. She saw me watching Linda down below and asked me if that turned me on. She reached over and put her hand on my crotch and said it sure doesn't feel like it. I told her I was having a bad day, but maybe I'd be back another day. I saw Linda and the other 3 women get up and walk toward the door. I said goodbye to Bambi and gave her $20. I headed downstairs and followed my wife and her friends to the parking lot. Linda got into the car with Charlie. While Lisa and the other woman got in another vehicle. I followed Linda, and they drove about a mile and into a motel. They didn't even stop at the front desk. I thought they must have had the room already reserved and had gotten their key cards. I was about to walk up to the counter. When I saw Lisa and the Asian woman getting out of their car, I moved out of the way in case Lisa recognized me. They also walked past the counter and went up in the elevator. I went up to the reservation desk and asked the reservation clerk if my wife, Linda Bradford, had made our reservations. She had. The desk clerk was helpful and checked his computer. He confirmed that my wife had made the reservation that morning. I wasn't sure if I was lucky or sad that she was paying for the room, but at least I was able to get the information I needed. I asked him if she had left me a key card and if I could see some identification. He was nice and just doing his job. I showed him my driver's license and he told me that she'd already given him both of them earlier that day. I could get another one, but it would cost me $5. I shook my head and said I'd get her to give me the money back for this. As I handed him the $5, he smiled and said his wife was always forgetting. He handed me a new card and told me they were in room 421, which was registered for 2 people. There was no reason for him to doubt me. I wasn't sure what I would say or how I would handle this, unless she could be very convincing. Our marriage might be over. I actually hoped that they would be just. I was sitting there talking business, but I had a feeling something was off. The only business you sneak into a motel room for is the kind you don't talk about. This was a 2-room suite. It had been about 20 minutes since they had entered the motel. I used the key card and slowly opened the door. I could hear them in the adjoining room. I felt pretty stupid standing there. I'd read a lot of stories about husbands doing this, but it was harder than I'd thought. I couldn't believe the mess in the room. They must have stripped as soon as they walked in. Clothes were thrown everywhere. I saw my wife's dress and what I figured was. I could hear sounds coming from the next room. I knew it was Linda moving around. I'd heard her for the last 20 years, and it made my stomach jump. My wife was being unfaithful with another woman. I had to ask myself why I was even there, but I knew I had to know. I walked through the door, and there on the bed was Linda. I saw Charlie, the son of a bitch, with Linda. They both looked at me and were shocked. Charlie looked at me and said, "Please don't hurt me." Linda lay there in shock, not even speaking. If he didn't do what I said, I would hurt him. "No, don't do this in front of my husband," she screamed. I guess she got her voice back. I told her to shut up. After tonight, I wouldn't still consider her my wife. I wanted some answers. I asked Charlie if he was a guy or something. He told me he was a female impersonator. He wasn't a guy. It seems that Lisa was opening a new nightclub a ways out of town. She was having a female impersonator as well as many other acts. She contacted Linda. She told her she could have exclusive rights to write about and take pictures of the new nightclub. She'd invited her over to meet 3 of the female impersonators, Charlie, the Asian guy, and another one I hadn't seen. They'd go around to the different lounges in town to promote Lisa's nightclub. Not many people knew they were female. They were impersonators, that's for sure. They didn't talk much because it might have given them away. Linda was still crying into her pillow. I asked Charlie one more question. Did she play all 3 of you? Did she ever tell you she couldn't or wouldn't do it? Charlie looked at me and said, "No, we never forced her. She was always willing." I took pictures with my cell phone throughout the whole ordeal. I went to the other room and cut up the clothes. I had to get rid of this rage. It was the only thing I could think of. Charlie sat there scared. I really thought of telling him, but it wouldn't have accomplished anything. It would just get me busted and sent away. No thanks. I told Lyndon not to. I was going to come home tonight and move out. I would also be seeing a lawyer. I walked out, returned the key card to the desk clerk, and left. I should have felt better, but I didn't. I got home, and both of my kids were there. I told my kids that I had caught their mother cheating on me and that I would be moving out and getting a divorce. I didn't tell them the details. Becky was upset and said she hated her mother. I told her, "Becky, love your mother, but hate what she has done. She has always loved you kids. I don't know why she did what she did, but I can no longer stay married to her. I could never trust her again." Brian asked, "Where are you going?" He was trying to play it cool, but I could tell he was near tears. I could tell he was near tears himself. "I'll stay with your grandparents until I find a nice apartment. You kids can stay here with your mother. You'll be on your own soon enough. You can always call me if you need anything. The deal with your college still stands for both of you. I'll pay my share like we agreed." I packed a few suitcases with my personal things and spent my last night in the house. Becky even made me breakfast the next morning. As you can imagine, Linda never came home that night. My parents were pretty upset when I told them I was getting a divorce because of Linda's infidelity. They asked me if there was any chance of us working things out, and I told them there wasn't. Becky called me and said her mother was dropped off at noon by some guy in the same car that the woman had picked. I didn't have the heart to tell her that the woman and the guy were the same person. The following Monday, I went to see my friend Bob, who was a lawyer. I explained what I knew and asked him to start divorce proceedings. I wanted to get the accounts settled and equity divided. I told him that even though she cheated, I would use irreconcilable differences because of the kids. If she fought the divorce, I'd file for adultery and name names, including her friend Lisa. I had my phone with me at the motel and had taken pictures of Lisa getting duck and so on. I made copies of those photos and asked my lawyer to send a copy of them along with the divorce papers. I asked him to put a rush on it, and he had it ready by the following Friday and had it delivered to my workplace. She tried to call me time and time again, but I wouldn't take her calls. She even called my parents, but my dad told her he wasn't interested in her side of things at the present time. One thing I found out was that Becky did her own investigation. She told me that she heard that Linda's old friend Lisa was back in town and was opening up a nightclub. I almost had to laugh when she told me that there were going to be female impersonators. And she had to wonder if that was the woman her mom was going out with. My girl was smart. You knew that, didn't you? Dad, she said after telling me, you caught Mom with one of them, didn't you? My mom would go into her room and cry a lot. My lawyer had all our joint accounts frozen. Neither of us could access the ACC system. I had a credit card of my own that I was able to use. I was sure Linda had one in her name only. Also, a lot of our bills were paid automatically from our current account. They wouldn't get paid, it would only be for a couple of weeks. We could both survive until then. The day the papers were served was the day I went to the lounge and met Beth. I knew I had to go home and face Linda. She would have received the divorce papers. I wanted to get on with my life. I called ahead and Linda answered the phone. I told her I would be there for our final talk. I knocked on the door and Linda opened it. It's still your house too. You could have come in. I received the divorce papers. I couldn't believe it. I was served on the day I went to the lounge and met Beth. I knew I had to go home and face Linda. She would have received the divorce papers, and I wanted to get on with my life. I called ahead, and Linda answered the phone. I told her I would be there for our final talk. I knocked on the door, and Linda opened it. It's still your house too, you could have come in. I received the divorce papers. I couldn't believe it. I made copies of those pictures. She said, all that is, I entered the door. Are you going to sign the papers and get this marriage over with? You never gave me a chance to explain anything. We can work this out. I know we can. I love you, Jay. She had tears in her eyes. You don't love me any more than the man in the moon. You're scared of being on your own. You want to explain things to me. I'll tell you what I know. If I'm wrong, just let me know. You cheated on me. You weren't forced or manipulated. It goes back to when you told me you didn't know about Lisa and her husband. Rumor has it you got your goodies off way back then. Who told you that? Asked the nervous Linda. No one ever said anything to me, but I thought I'd mention it and see her reaction. I'm not telling you anything now. Your friend Lisa is back. You were in town, so you figured you could play around on me again. This time, though, you got caught. I do believe that you did get the job of writing the story of the new nightclub. Playing around with the female impersonators was a bonus. If anyone we knew saw you with them, all you had to do was say they're your clients. No one would question that. I can't believe you cheated all these years. We had a good life. I wish I'd never found out, but you kept pushing the envelope. Now that I know the truth, you make me sick. I don't even want to know how many men you've been with. I wouldn't believe you anyway. Right off the bat, we both know you played Charlie the Asian and the other guy. I don't even want to know the rest. Please, Jay, let me speak. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I can change. All I need is a chance to prove it. Becky said you bought cruise tickets for the holidays for us. Let's go together and start over. I will use the tickets and I will be starting over, but it won't be with you. I want you to sign the papers and get this marriage over with. If you don't, I will refile using adultery and use all the pictures you have copies of. According to our state, everything. I suggest we split everything 50-50ths. You can have the house and I'll get half the value out of our savings. I don't want much from the house other than a few of my personal items. I don't want anything that reminds me of you. I'm waiting 2 days, and if my lawyer hasn't received your signed papers, I'll refile using adultery. Don't test me because you'll lose. Just think of your parents and all your friends and your kids seeing the pictures. Everyone will know you cheated. It's one thing to think about it, but seeing the evidence is another. You only have 2 days. I turned around and walked out. Linda signed the divorce papers and had them returned to my lawyer the next day. He drew up a document dividing our assets down the middle. I would receive the majority of our savings. She'd get the house and the furnishings, and I'd have my name removed from our checking account and joint credit cards. We'd both keep our vehicles, and there'd be no child support since our kids were over 18. No alimony either. We'd both keep our retirement programs. I'd already promised the kids I'd pay my share for their education. They'd have to work part over the years and summers, but they wouldn't have to borrow. Bob told Linda that he'd take the papers to a judge for approval if she wanted. She could get her own attorney and have the proposed decree looked over. Linda told him that she just wanted it over with now. Bob told me she looked dejected. I guess she thought, since we were married so many years, that I might give her another chance. She knows I've always been fair with her and would never do anything to hurt the kids. I guess you could say she trusted me, but I didn't trust her anymore. Becky told me Linda cried when she heard that I'd planned a holiday cruise for us as a getaway. She knew that this time she'd gone too far and got caught when Bob came back from the judge. He told me I could go and pick up my personal items. He even asked Linda if she wanted to be there when I got my stuff. She told him she didn't. I was able to get the few things I wanted in 2 loads in a pickup truck. My dad said I could store them in the basement. I didn't have much, so the following day I got a call. May I speak to Jay Bradford, please? This is he? What can I do for you? It was Beth Williams on the phone. We met a week ago and she asked me to check on available apartments in our area. I was surprised she was calling me. I sounded pretty stern on the phone, so I apologized for that. It's been a pretty bad week for me. I'm glad she called. You said you were looking for apartments, so I thought I'd check if there's anything available near you. There is. It's a couple of doors down, and an older couple just moved out. The owners haven't put up a for rent sign yet. Are you interested? Absolutely. I can be at your place in an hour. Would you mind going over there with me? I'll take you out for dinner afterwards. She agreed, and I quickly cleaned up and went to see her and the apartment. Beth seemed so gentle and easygoing. We went and looked at the apartment, which had 2 bedrooms and a stove. It even had a microwave oven. I told the agent I would take it. I could move in the following weekend after they finished cleaning it. The lease would be for 6 months at a time. After giving them a deposit and the first month's rent, I took Beth to Red Lobster for dinner. I told her that I was a bit nervous that I hadn't dated for 20 years. If I do anything wrong, please tell me. I told her a little about my life and where I worked. I also told her that I now had 2 kids in college. She asked about the divorce. I told her it was in a 60 after that, I'd be a single divorced person. I told her I caught my wife cheating on me. There was no way she could deny it since I had photos, but I left out Charlie and company. We went around and around about the divorce and how she promised she wouldn't do it again. I found out it wasn't the first time, and there was no way I could ever trust her again. Your wife is a mess, said Beth as she smiled at me. I remember telling her the same. We had a good laugh about her husband. I like being with her. She was so kind and gentle. We had dinner and talked for a while longer, then I drove her home. Beth, thank you for everything. I'd like to see you again. I'd taken a bedroom set out of the basement as well as a few other items. My dad and I were carrying the dresser when Beth appeared at the door. She asked if she could help. I had my car full of kitchen stuff that my mom had given me. I'd already got most of it. She told me I needed some more stuff. Beth helped me put the stuff in the cupboards. I introduced her to my dad. We went back to get another load of furniture. It was for the living room. Beth rode over with me in the car. My mom was surprised but very happy to meet her. I told my mom that Beth had found me an apartment and was my neighbor. Once we'd finished unloading the furniture and putting my stuff away, my dad went home. I asked Beth if she wanted to go out for dinner as a thank you for helping me out. Can we go back to the lounge where we met and get a Reuben sandwich? I love the idea, I said. When we walked in, Joe waved to us. It was getting on for evening and a bit more crowded. He shouted that we were seated so we could drink until our food arrived. Beth, she told me more about herself. She has an older sister. She said she told her sister about me, and her sister couldn't believe she let me take her home. Now she wants to meet you. I guess she's worried about me being on a rebound. I told her you were getting divorced, and she nearly went off the deep end. When we got back to Beth's apartment, we were holding hands again. I leaned forward and kissed her gently on the lips. I'm sorry, but I wanted to do that since I met her. You know, I said. She stared at me but didn't really say anything about it. Good night, Jay. Don't forget you have to meet my sister next week before she goes berserk. A few days later, I called Beth. I didn't want to push myself on her. I asked her out for dinner, but she said I should come over and she'd make us some spaghetti. I said yes. We sat on the couch and used TV trays, ate dinner, and watched TV. I loved being with her. She was so easy to talk to. I knew I had to go home since she had to teach school the next day. I kissed her again, not passionately but very gently, and said good night. We went to visit her sister Sandy. I was a bit nervous, not knowing what to expect. Sandy had made dinner for us, and I met her husband Tom and her 2 teenage kids. She asked me what I did for a living, so I told her about my job and where I went to college. I told her kids that I had 2 kids in college and what they were studying. They said they hoped to go to college someday, too. After dinner, Tom and I went in the living room and had a cup of coffee. We were the same age and seemed to have a lot in common. The girls came back in. Sandy seemed to be a lot nicer. Beth told me on the way home that her sister approved of me. We both laughed this time. Before I left to go home, I told her I liked being with her. She said she liked me too. Jay, I don't mind dating you. In fact, I like being around you. It's just that I won't sleep with you until you're divorced, she said. I don't mind. I told her it was fine with me. I just like being with her. We began to have dinner together at least twice a week on weekends. We had dinner at her parents' house or mine. We were a couple even though we hadn't slept together a week before my divorce was final. I introduced Beth to Becky and Brian. We all went out to dinner together. I told the kids that I didn't want to hear anything about their mom. The kids loved Beth. We went out for pizza and the kids asked Beth a few questions. They were so happy that I found someone, so I wasn't alone. They even told Beth that. And she just laughed. She was that easy to get along with. Becky surprised me when she asked Beth a question. Would you go on a cruise over the holidays with Dad? He's got tickets to leave on Christmas Eve and return on New Year's Day. I was taken aback. I thought about asking Beth when the time was nearer. Beth said, Becky, she's a woman. She needs to know ahead of time to plan her wardrobe. I know you care for her or you wouldn't have asked us to come meet her. Beth, it is true. I do have 2 tickets for a holiday cruise. I was going to ask you after my divorce was final next week, but a certain young lady let the cat out of the bag. I know it's a big decision and I understand. I said yes, I'll go. Beth interrupted me. I'd love to go on a cruise with you. As for Becky, she was right. A woman needs more time to plan. Don't be so hard on her. I watched her smile at Becky. I could feel the sincerity in her voice. The following week, my divorce was final and I was not at all unhappy. I asked Beth was really keen to go out and celebrate with me. She even mentioned a new nightclub that had opened up just out of town and asked if I'd like to go there. I didn't tell her the details of my divorce and said we could check it out. She told me that some of the teachers at school said they had female impersonators and also famous people impersonators like Elvis, Ricky Nelson, and many others. I went to her house and she looked beautiful. She was wearing a dress that showed off her figure and was about 6 inches above her knees. I remember telling her that I'd never had a teacher that looked like her when I was at school. We invited Sandy and Tom to come with us. I didn't know what to expect or if I should tell Beth anything. The place was crowded but was really like a Las Vegas nightclub. We were seated at a table and ordered drinks. The impersonators were exceptionally good. They looked and sounded just like the original stars. We ordered dinner and while we were eating, the female impersonators came on stage. Tom said, "Those can't be guys." Sandy replied, "You put your hand in their pants and you might not like what you find." They lip-synced to songs by famous female singers, and of course, it was the original voices we heard. I did recognize the one they called Charlie, the Asian, who was named Kim. The black person I saw for the first time was Sable. Their acts were good, but I didn't like the visions that came to mind. I knew Linda was very familiar with all three of them. There was some dancing after the show and I knew I couldn't lie to Beth. I told her the truth about Linda and that I caught her with one of the impersonators. I told her there was no way I wanted to keep secrets from her. Beth kissed me. "I read your wife's article on the nightclub. I asked you to bring me here hoping you would be honest with me. I felt you were hiding something since you never mentioned anything about where your ex worked or who." I knew she was with him. I'd heard good things about the club from people at school, so I wasn't trying to trick you. I love you, Jay. I don't have any doubts. "Hey, you two get a room," laughed Sandy. "I intend to as soon as we leave here," replied Beth. "Beth, I never lied to you. There were some things that I didn't care to remember. I'm sorry if you thought differently. I love you, Jay, and I want you to know you can tell me anything. You don't need to hold anything in. I'm here for you if you ever need to talk." We left the club and we dropped off Sandy and Tom. They thanked us for a great evening and said we should do it again sometime on the way home. I asked Beth, "Your place or mine?" She replied with a smile, "Yours please." We went to my apartment. I was actually nervous. I hadn't been with another woman in over 20 years, and it had been over 3 months since I was with Linda. Beth looked at me and said, "Do you love me?" I replied, "I'm not used to giving myself to men." Ree was only the second man I'd been with. I've always been a bit shy about dating, but with you it's different. I do feel I love you. All I can think about is making you happy. It's going to be different and new for both of us. We kissed gently yet with passion. After that night, we spent all our nights together, sometimes at her apartment, other times at mine. We didn't have sex every night, but we did cuddle a lot. It was time for us to get ready for the cruise. It was funny, but her parents and my parents were old-fashioned and didn't approve of us going as single people. Our parents weren't happy about us going on the cruise as single people, even though they didn't say it directly. They said that in their day, people traveled like that, but they were married first. I told them that things were different now. I also spoke to Becky and Brian and told them that I might ask Beth to marry me. Would they have any problems with that? I'd only been divorced a little over a month. They were happy for me and told me they loved Beth and that she made me happy. I did tell them that Beth and I never talked about it and that she might want to wait. I just wanted to know how they felt about it. We flew down to Florida on Christmas Eve. The cruise ship was beautiful and we had a cabin with a queen-sized bed. We attended the greeting meeting, which was basically just a way of getting to know each other. They told us about the ship rules and a lot of the functions that would take place in the week ahead. We were both really excited because the ship was leaving the dock within the hour. Beth and I stood on the deck and looked out across the ocean. Beth said, "Is there something you want to tell me?" "There aren't any secrets, remember." Beth said, "Can you tell me?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a ring. "Beth, I know we haven't known each other all that long. You might think that this is much too early in our relationship, but I know how I feel about you. Will you marry me? Oh my God, yes, of course I will. When do you want to get married tonight on this ship? I asked the captain, and he said he could do it. He has all the necessary papers. He's done it many times. So will you marry me tonight? And this can be our honeymoon vacation cruise. I wanted to save my pocket, so I planned my honeymoon vacation here on a cruise. We both knew that a lot of people would say we should get to know each other longer, but we were both sure what we wanted. We wanted to be together. Beth cried as she said yes. I contacted the captain and he announced on the loudspeaker that there would be a wedding in the main dining hall. An hour after the ship set out, I went and put on my suit and waited in the dining hall for Beth. She came out dressed in a beautiful blue gown. She later told me she'd bought it to wear on New Year's Eve, but this was a much better occasion. The hall was packed with well-wishers. Everyone likes a surprise wedding. As soon as we set sail, everyone cheered. The first thing we did was call our parents and Becky and Brian to let them know we were married. We could hear crying on the other end of the phone on each call. We went into one of the men lounges and danced. The captain said the buffet was set up for dinner and we would be the first ones to get our food. It was a wonderful start to our honeymoon. We had a great honeymoon and a new life during our cruise. We visited 3 islands, ate lots of food and danced every night. We made love every day. The New Year's evening party was great, but we'd been partying all week. We made sure we brought in the new year with a real bang as we got off the plane when we returned. Sandy and Tom were waiting for us. Beth and Sandy were crying. Sandy said, "You take care of my little sister." I hugged Sandy and said, "I'll always be there for you." They took us out for dinner and we told them about the cruise. We headed back home and we moved into Beth's apartment. We spoke with my landlord and he said I could move out but I wouldn't be able to get my deposit back. We decided to do that since it was the cheapest way out. Life went on and we enjoyed our life. Sometimes we went out for dinner, other times we stayed home. We spent most of our free time together. I spent very few nights on the road, only when it was absolutely necessary. I wanted to be home with Beth. I got home one day and Beth looked at me differently. I couldn't place the look. What's the problem? Did I do something wrong? You'll have to decide. You got me pregnant, she said, tears in her eyes. When? How? I mean, I thought you said you weren't able to have kids. I probably looked shocked. I asked the doctor if I could have kids, given all my physical conditions. She said it would be harder, but not impossible. So, how do you feel about it? I hugged her and said I thought it was wonderful. We'll have our own baby. I was happy and excited to be a future father again. We found out a few things after our honeymoon. Beth had talked to her sister, who told her that her ex-husband had married his secretary. Ree had married his secretary. They wanted to be married before the birth of the baby. When the baby was born, it was not white. The baby boy was Mexican. Now, Ree wants an adoption, but his secretary is fighting it. Becky and Brian are doing well in college. They're getting along much better with their mother. It seems that the night that Beth and I went to the nightclub, Linda was there. Becky says her mom realized the man she lost was still there, and she still has her job at Z Magazine. She also dates some, but hasn't brought anyone home for the kids to meet. Becky says that Liette and Lisa are no longer friends. She puts some of the blame for her situation on Lisa, who she says was last seen leaving the country and moving to Amsterdam. As for me and Beth, I'm over the moon about the birth of the baby. Beth is going to take a short leave of absence so she can return to teaching. We already have 2 grandmothers who are willing to babysit. I think it's great how 2 people who were down on their luck in a bar ended up changing their lives completely. Life is good if you have the right people to share it with. This story is really captivating and inspiring. It shows how chance encounters and unexpected twists of fate can lead to big changes in people's lives. Things like love, family, second chances and loyalty are at the heart of this story, which makes it universal and relatable. This story offers hope and inspires belief in a brighter future, even when things seem dark and hopeless today.